You already know what needs to be done, you're just not doing it consistently enough to change anything. You've had those moments. Sitting there, fully aware of the next step. Maybe it's finishing a task you've delayed, going to the gym instead of scrolling, or sticking to a plan you made just a few hours ago. Nothing is unclear. But you still hesitate. You wait. You delay. You look for the right moment to start, again. And the truth is, you don't stay where you are because life is complicated. You stay where you are because your actions don't match what you already understand. Look at a simple situation. You plan your day the night before. It's clear. Structured. You know exactly what matters. The next day starts, and for the first hour, everything feels fine. Then resistance shows up. Not extreme. Just enough to slow you down. You check your phone. You push one task later. You tell yourself you'll get to it after a short break. And that small delay turns into a shift in direction. Now you're reacting instead of executing. By the end of the day, you didn't fail completely, but you didn't move forward either. And that's the real problem. Not failure. Stagnation. You're not lacking ability. You're not lacking information. You're lacking alignment between what you know and what you do. In this video, you're going to see why that gap exists, and what changes when you stop waiting for the right moment and start executing what's already clear. Because until your actions become consistent, nothing else you improve will matter. What keeps you stuck isn't complexity, it's repetition of the same internal patterns that quietly override your decisions. There are three mechanisms running this gap between knowing and doing. First is execution delay bias. You already decided what matters, but your mind keeps inserting a gap between decision and action. That gap feels harmless, but it becomes the space where resistance grows. The longer you wait, the less urgent the task feels, even though nothing actually changed. Second is emotional permissioning. You don't act based on clarity, you act based on emotional approval. If you feel slightly tired, slightly distracted, or slightly unmotivated, you allow that feeling to justify postponement. Over time, emotion becomes the gatekeeper of discipline. Third is incomplete follow-through loops. You start tasks, but don't fully close them. You move between things, leaving small gaps everywhere, unfinished work, partial focus, broken attention. Your brain slowly adapts to incompletion as a normal state, so finishing starts feeling unnatural. Take a simple work example. You open a task you know is important. You work on it for a few minutes, then switch to something easier. Later you return, but with less clarity. Eventually, the day ends with progress scattered instead of completed. Nothing dramatic happened. No crisis. No failure. Just repeated interruptions that felt small in the moment. But that's how people stay exactly where they are, through small, justified breaks in execution. Now here's the structure you need to see clearly. Knowing is not the problem. Starting is not the problem. The real issue is continuing without emotional permission, delay, or reset. Once you understand this, the next step is not learning more. It's changing how you respond in the exact moment resistance appears. The real shift begins when you stop treating resistance as a signal to slow down. Because right now, resistance is functioning like a decision maker in your life. The moment something feels slightly uncomfortable, your behavior changes. Not dramatically, but enough to break continuity. And continuity is where results are formed. So the first mechanism to break is simple. You don't pause execution for emotional approval anymore. There's a moment in almost every day where this shows up. You sit down to do important work. You know exactly what needs attention. But before you fully engage, your mind offers alternatives, something easier, something faster, something less demanding. And if you listen to that shift even once, you've already changed direction. Not externally, internally. Because now your actions are no longer led by structure, they're led by reaction. This is where people lose months without realizing it. A simple work scenario makes it visible. You open a task, maybe writing, studying, or building something that requires focus. You feel steady for a few minutes. Then discomfort appears, not strong, just subtle. You feel slightly restless, slightly bored. Instead of staying with it, you switch tasks. You tell yourself it's temporary, but that temporary becomes a pattern. You don't notice the damage immediately because the day still looks active. You were doing things, but nothing reached completion with depth. This is how inconsistency disguises itself as productivity. The second mechanism is even more subtle. Your tolerance for unfinished states is too high. You've trained yourself to live in partial completion. Half-finished tasks, half-focused sessions, half-decisions. You rarely experience full closure. And without closure, your mind never builds certainty. You start to normalize fragmentation. Your attention fragments, your effort fragments, and eventually your identity follows. Not because you are incapable, but because you never stay long enough in one direction for it to solidify. Think about something basic like fitness. You plan to train consistently. The first few sessions go fine. Then one day, you shorten it. The next day, you skip. The day after that, you restart with new energy. But restart is the illusion. You didn't reset, you just interrupted the process enough times that momentum never formed. And momentum is what makes discipline feel easier over time. Without it, everything feels like starting over. There's a line often associated with Rohn: success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines, practiced every day. But the part most people miss is every day. Not occasionally. Not when convenient. Not when motivated. Every day means continuity without negotiation. The third mechanism is identity lag. This is where your self-image is still behind your intentions. You want to see yourself as someone who follows through, but your daily actions still include frequent exits. So your brain holds both identities at once. The version that wants consistency, and the version that allows interruption. And whichever one is reinforced more often becomes dominant. That's why effort alone doesn't change identity. Repetition without interruption does. Let's bring this into a real situation. Imagine someone working from home. They plan their day with structure, focused work blocks, limited distractions, clear goals. The morning starts well. They complete a few tasks. But then a small interruption appears, messages, notifications, something unrelated but easy to justify. They step away for just a minute. That minute expands. When they return, focus is weaker. Not gone, but fragmented. The task they were working on now feels heavier than it did before. So they switch again. By evening, they feel busy but not effective. And this repeats. Not because they don't care. Not because they lack discipline in theory. But because their execution is constantly interrupted by small, unchallenged decisions. This is where the real issue sits, not in motivation, but in permission. You keep allowing exits. And every allowed exit weakens the structure you're trying to build. So the shift is not about doing more. It's about removing the internal approval system that allows you to stop mid-process. Because once execution becomes continuous, even imperfectly, your results start to compound in a way that effort alone never could. You don't need a new plan. You need uninterrupted follow-through long enough for the system to form. At this point, the problem is no longer unclear to you. You can see it. The interruptions. The delays. The quiet decisions that pull you away from what you already know matters. None of it is hidden anymore, it's just repeated. And that's the real shift you have to understand. Discipline was never meant to feel like a burst of effort. It was never supposed to be something you turn on when you feel ready. That approach is exactly why your results keep resetting. Because effort without continuity doesn't build anything stable. What actually builds stability is behavior that doesn't break under variation in mood, energy, or interest. Right now, your system still depends on conditions. If you feel good, you move. If you feel off, you pause. If the task feels light, you continue. If it feels heavy, you step away. That kind of system doesn't produce compounding, it produces cycles. And cycles feel productive in the moment, but they never accumulate into identity. Identity is formed differently. It's formed when repetition removes negotiation from your behavior. When you stop asking whether you should continue and simply continue because that's the structure you follow. Think about something simple like showing up to work or fulfilling responsibilities tied to others. You don't constantly debate whether you will show up. You don't renegotiate the decision every morning. You already consider it non-optional. That's why it holds. The same principle applies here. The gap between who you are and who you want to be isn't knowledge, it's enforcement. Not external enforcement, but internal consistency that doesn't dissolve under discomfort. And over time, that consistency starts to compound. Not because each action is extraordinary, but because none of them are reset. Each day adds instead of restarting. Each effort builds instead of replacing the last. And slowly, without dramatic change, your behavior begins to stabilize into something reliable. That's where self-respect actually forms. Not from intention. From follow-through that doesn't require emotional agreement. And once that stability exists, you stop experiencing your life as something you constantly have to restart. It becomes continuous, predictable, aligned. You were never missing discipline. You were missing consistency that survives resistance. Because when you remove the option to stop every time something feels slightly uncomfortable, something subtle changes in how you operate. You stop interpreting discomfort as a signal to exit. You stop treating hesitation as permission to delay. And you stop restarting your life every time you fall out of rhythm. Nothing dramatic happens on the surface. But internally, the structure changes. Your actions become less debated and more direct. Less emotional, more automatic. And over time, that creates something most people never experience, not motivation, not inspiration, but reliability. A version of you that doesn't constantly begin again. Just continues. And in that continuation, everything you've been trying to build starts to hold its shape.